Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of my podcast, Grit Stories of Resilience. This is a bittersweet time for me because I'm going to talk about a favorite place of mine that played a large role in my life. It's a building, a former warehouse on the corner of Jones and West Street in downtown Raleigh. It's more than a building. It's where the 42nd Street Oyster Bar has been located for a long, long time. First, on that corner as a small one-room place, which got its name of 42nd Street from not in Raleigh, but New York City, where some of the patrons would sometimes go for work and come back. And they named it after their location where they were in New York. It closed in 1974. And indeed, there's a sign on the article that's got a frame on it in the lounge of the Oyster Bar now that says it's really bad and it's really sad when the bartender cries. I use that same line in my title for today's podcast. You know it's bad when the bartender cries. And then the song, Thanks for the Memories. I don't know when I first went into the Oyster Bar itself, but I do remember driving by on the way to my law office, which was only, a couple of blocks away in the spring or summer of 1987. The Oyster Bar was not yet open, but it was getting close. The overhang buildings, the overhang where you could go in and park your cars was up. The sign was up. It was coming. It looked modern and new. It had been freshly painted. It's like you'd never seen the warehouse there before. And so Thad Ewer, who is famous for having developed the Angus barn in Raleigh, and his family had a big buffet lunch to start it all off and welcome everyone to 42nd Street. And it was gangbusters. There were lines out the door. They were serving lunch. They were serving dinner. They had fresh fish. They had steamed oysters. They had oysters on the half shell. They did fried food as well as anybody in the world. They hired their chef, I'm told, because he told me once that when Thad was interviewing him for the job, he wanted to know what his qualifications were. And he kept saying, but he hadn't distinguished himself yet with Mr. Ewer. Finally Thad said, well, why should I really hire you? And the guy said, because I can get a lot of seafood out quickly and it's good. That's why you should hire me. He got the job. He stayed there for a long, long time. Back for a considerable period. He was there when I worked there as a waiter, as the chef there. Anyway, my time at the Oyster Bar has three separate categories or three separate times. First as a customer, then as a worker, a waiter, and a host, and then as a customer again, where I became sort of a regular with a bunch of other folks in the bar area until recently. And now it's going to memories. I want to take you back, though, to the summer of 1987. And I'm at work in my law office, and we're having a business development meeting somewhere with the firm. And Ted Reynolds, who later would develop the Second Empire restaurant right behind our office, was a partner. And I was on the business development committee of the firm in Raleigh. So we were hosting a bunch of people out at Ted's farm, which looked a little like South Fork. And it was being catered by 42nd Street. It's sort of a shrimperoo. That's where I met people who worked there for the first time. I met Brad Hurley. Brad, who worked his way up became a general manager and a co-owner of the Oyster Bar, and remained that until now as a co-owner of the Oyster Bar, and has been so successful in what he did. I got to know Brad pretty well because I would go there a lot, 2 or 3 times a week for lunch, calling ahead of time to the manager, assistant manager, Janet Malley, who worked there then as a manager, to see if I needed to make a reservation or whether I could just walk in. Sometimes I'd go by myself, oftentimes with a couple of people from the law firm, sometimes people from out of town. My friend Henry Babb from Wilson would come up, and we would always go there, have soup and salad, clam chowder and salad, and iced tea. Or if I was not eating healthy with Henry, I would have what I always had, which is so good. Their popcorn shrimp, a cheese potato, slaw, or salad, and iced tea. That was my staple. It was really good. And hush puppies. A friend of mine told me it doesn't take much nerve to eat no hush puppies, but it takes a lot just to stop at one. That's true. They're that good. I would go there sometimes after work, then oftentimes after work. It became my place to go. It's sort of like the bar Cheers, where people knew your name. I got to know the bartenders. I met some of the wait staff. People from the law firm would go. It was only a 2, 3 minute walk, and you'd have a beer or two and a glass of Chardonnay or wine, red wine, before you left downtown Raleigh for the day. A great place to unwind and see people. It was always busy. People from every walk of life. Members of the General Assembly would oftentimes come there. They legislature building was not very far away. They could walk or drive down there pretty easily. It was easily accessible. There wasn't a great deal of competition in restaurants downtown Raleigh, so they had the market pretty much to themselves at that time. Thursdays, Thursdays was the day that it was so busy. They had a band play on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturday nights. A small band in the lounge, and they would pack people in. They had police to help manage the crowd. It would go out into the parking lot. The cocktail waitresses would walk around with beers in their hip pockets to pull them out and charge you $3 or $4. Just take that top right off, and they'd walk away with cash in their pockets. Being a cocktail waitress right then was a good place to make a lot of money, I got to tell you. So it was fun. I got to see so many people and enjoy myself. It was where you could escape, which is what that place became. You know, it's somewhat ironic that the last Christmas party or holiday party that our law firm had, they wanted us to dress up as different things. And so I went down and talked to Janet, the manager, and wound up wearing a waiter's uniform to the law firm. I didn't get it back right away. I was sort of slow in returning it after the party, which is a good thing because later on I would wear those same slacks, pants, suspenders, the whole 9 yards myself when I would work there. It took me time to get ready to go to the 42nd Street because that was sort of a hot place to go and be. I remember talking to Brad about working there, and they also owned a restaurant called the Border Cafe, which was a Tex-Mex place, not in downtown Raleigh, but North Raleigh. I worked there for a while as a cook for $5.50 an hour. And then I had to stop at the suggestion of my doctor and lawyers from doing that for a while, mainly my doctor. And it was some time before I would go back to the oyster bar as an employee. Before I would go back, though, I remember I was in a lot of trouble, legal trouble. And so I was going to be sentenced in court. And I was instructed by my lawyers to get just a handful of perhaps some good character witnesses who could write a character letter. I had Judge Dupree, Judge Earl Britt. They each wrote, two federal judges wrote character letters of reference for me. And then there was Brad Hurley, the co-owner of 42nd Street, wrote one for me. It's sort of a ironic, funny thing to tell you. He didn't write it. He asked me to write it, which I did. It was a great letter. He signed it. He read it and signed it, but I drafted it for him. I don't know whether it did any particularly good or not, but I came out okay after everything was over. And then I decided after I got out and I did my first stab at a book, which went absolutely nowhere. I decided I needed a job, something different. I sort of thought I wanted to work in a bookstore, but that didn't work out. I didn't want to work in an office. I didn't want to work. I never wanted to see the inside of a law office again in my lifetime on this planet. So that wasn't going to work. So I went to Brad and asked for a job. And as I have said before, he said, "And doing what?" I said, "Well, I don't know. What have you got? Can you make me a manager?" "No, Jim, we can't make you a manager. You don't know anything about being a manager." "Okay, we'll come back this afternoon. We'll see what we can do." I came back. He had talked to Christine, who was one of his assistant managers at the time, and she was in charge of the hostess stand. Notice I said hostess. There were no male hosts then at the oyster bar. And he said, "We're going to make you one. We're going to make you a host." I said, "Well, what do hosts do, Brad?" He said, "Well, they take names, they take people to the table, that sort of thing. You can do this, Jim." "Yeah. How much do you pay?" "Jim, we pay you $6 an hour." I said, I said, "Was that before or after taxes?" He said, "Jim, that's before taxes." Oh my God. Now look, Jim, I'm not going to require you to wear a uniform like everybody else. I'll let you wear maybe a slacks, shirt, tie, maybe a sport coat. Maybe people think you're important and that you're an owner and they can manage or a manager or something. They can complain to you rather than me. Okay. So I took the job. I think it was the first of the week. I went home and thought about it for not 24 hours and decided, I just can't do that. I have too much pride to do this. I was just stupid. And so I wrote him a letter, just like a lawyer would write a letter. "Dear Brad, Ray Cohen, stopping not working." And took it down there. He wasn't there. I went at lunchtime. I probably intentionally hoping he would not be there. He wasn't there. And I left it on his table or his desk in his office with an envelope with his name on it and walked out. I was supposed to work at my first shift later that day. I did not go. I did not show up. That's a firing offense if you don't do something like that. But I didn't show up or call or anything. I left the letter. I went back and saw him again. He was drinking a glass of iced tea in the lounge and sitting at the table. And he was nice to me. He was polite. And I asked him if I could have my job back. I reconsidered. He looked at me. He said, "Okay, Jim, we'll let you do this, provided that you have to start now. I'm not going to let you go home and change your mind. You wear a coat and tie tomorrow, but you're going to start tonight." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." The lore is that in my life that everybody thought I should work at a place of serving public and that sort of thing. That isn't how I remember it. They may be right, but that's not how I remember it. What I remember is that nobody wanted me to do this at all. And they thought it was two social places where I went too much. And so I decided, well, I will go anyway and do it. So I went, didn't show up back at her house. I just worked that night. I think I called, let them know I'm coming. And I remember two things from that night. First, someone dropped a glass of water all over the floor near the hostess stand or one of the tables. The floor was wet. And I remember looking at it and said, who's going to get that up? And one of the hostesses said, you are. How do I do that? And they looked at me and says, get your hand towel, put on the floor, put your foot on it, wipe it around. You don't have to get on your knees, just wipe around with your foot. I did. It's the first time I'd ever done that in my life. It was amazing. It worked. The second thing that happened that night was two yahoos came out. They liked the glasses with the lettering of the Oyster Bar on it, and they knew that I was new and all this kind of stuff because I looked brand new, you know. And they said they want them, but they didn't want to pay for them because they have as souvenirs. And I looked at them and said, okay. So I gave these two glasses away. And somebody said, Jim, you shouldn't have done that. I said, well, I did. But I learned you can fool me once, but you're not going to fool me twice. And that never happened to me again, though people tried. It never worked again. So I was off to that start. They wouldn't let me do much of the writing of the menus because my handwriting was so bad. I like to get on the loudspeaker or the microphone and tell people their table was ready when they were in the lounge. It was so crowded. And I remember doing it like, the price is right. You all come on down. Your table is ready. Brad, I thought was going to have a heart attack when he heard me do that. But I did. It went okay. And I didn't do it for a number of weeks until one night when, as I've said before, this very nice couple came in and I was walking them to their table. And I looked at the lady. She had this nice, long, wide, flowing dress. I asked her, so tell me when your baby is due. You should never do that. You should never do that. And she looked at me. She said, I'm not pregnant. Hmm. Well, no more hush puppies for you. And her husband started laughing. Fortunately, she laughed also. But I decided this may have gone as far as I can take it. The next day, I talked to Keith Nye, who was one of the managers, and asked if I could train as a waiter, maybe make more money at the same time. He said, yes, Jim, you can do that, but you may not want to do that because you're going to have to wear the uniform if you do that. Are you ready to wear this uniform? I said, Keith, I wore prison greens for 3 months. I can sure as hell wear this uniform. He said, okay. That's easier said than done. If you've never done it before, you look like a clown, or at least I did. I learned though that you look younger. Guys look younger if you roll your sleeves up to your elbows. You don't look quite as much as a nerd with a bow tie and suspenders and pants with stripes down the side of the pants. But anyway, I started. I trained for 2 or 3 weeks. It takes most people 3 or 4 days. It took me close to a month. I still hadn't gotten the hang of it yet. And I had to keep training again and again and again because first time I waited tables, it didn't go very well for me one Sunday night. And so they thought I needed more work as a trainee. So I kept doing it and finally began to get the hang of it. At least I could do stuff without screwing up too much. You're supposed to keep a sheet of paper, a pad, a pen, and write down what people order. This technology had not gotten to where it is today, where they come up with this thing that looks like a mini computer or a phone, and then they take your order and put it in that way. It's not done that way. This is old school. And I just had sheets of paper that were tearful for pad, and then I would tear the pieces of paper off. They would go in my pocket. I would have no order to them. I didn't have enough sense to write down the table number that came from. I thought I could remember it or who would order what. So it was a disorganized mess. That's the best way to put it to you without going into all the details. It was an organized, awful mess. I used to think about phone calls and phone slips when I was a lawyer, and I couldn't remember what the people wanted after they'd been sitting on my desk for a few days. I said, well, if it's important, they'll call me back. I had that same philosophy about waiting tables. If I don't go back to the table, they'll flag me down and tell me what it is they ordered, and I can go put it in then. That's not a good way to do it. Also, back then, you had a little key. You put it into the computer, and you start that way, and you have to order the thing that would take the longest to cook and go down. Like, so if you're having a steak, you put the steak in first. And then the last thing you'd put on the list would be the fried food, because that's the fastest. But that's not the way that people order. You have to go through it and figure that out yourself and put that order in. It's one ticket. There was no way to separate tickets. There was no way to separate tickets. So separate checks was a nightmare if somebody wanted that. You had to go back in and ring everything in, do not make, to print out different tickets that way. Think about it. You have four people, you got to go back and ring it in four times, do not make, so the kitchen doesn't make it again. And that's how you separated checks. Sometimes I would lose my key. I'd leave it in the computer. Over here, it's like losing your phone. Have you ever lost your phone? You can't find your phone? You have to get somebody to call your number so you can find it? Well, that would happen to me. I had to go around from computer to computer all over the building looking for my key. And finally, I always found it. But it was scary there for a while. I remember one time, Chris Morgan, who was one of the assistant managers, said, Jim, we have this couple up there that's complained about you. I said, what are they complaining about? Everything gone fast. She said, well, the girl said that you were rude to her. Well, how was I rude? Well, you walked up to the table and said, hey guys, how you doing? And so, well, she thinks when you said, hey guys, that meant that she was not attractive. And I looked at Chris, I looked up the table, I said, well, Chris, she's not. He said, well, Jim, you can't say that. Okay, just let somebody else go and finish the table. I said, okay. That was the only time I ever had a complaint, not a written up complaint, but just somebody not happy. Except the first time when they sent me back for retraining. My first night didn't go well that first Sunday night. Christine was the manager then. I didn't drop the stuff very badly. Came close a couple of times. Floors oftentimes were wet. I slipped one time in the dining room and was carrying a tray of water and fell, held on to most of the water, but one poor glass of water went down some lady's back. She was very gracious about it because I fell and hurt my ankle, could hardly walk. I walked back up to the front bar. Christine was bartending that night. I said, Christine, I've really hurt my ankle. She said, put it up here, let's look at it. The mistake that I made was take my shoe off, because once you take your shoe off, you can't get it back on because it swells up you. So I had to work the rest of the night. It was early in the evening. I had to work the rest of the night in my socks because I couldn't wear the shoes. I did this for a long time. I learned to bust my tables if I needed to, because if I did that, then I'd get seated quicker. I was never very fast. I was never very efficient. I was not your best waiter. I didn't know much about the fish as others did. I could, however, help you have a good time. I could tell you stories if you wanted to know stories. The two most often questions I got asked in all the time that I worked there. The first was always, what is your fresh fish of the night? And I would say, well, it's grouper or mahi, salmon, perhaps swordfish, oftentimes tuna. How do you fix it? Well, you can have it grilled or blackened, lightly blackened, however you want it. You will fix it. What do you think's best? Oh, I don't have any question about that. I think the best way to get is the lightly blackened grouper with mashed potatoes, not the cheese potato or baked potato. Get mashed potatoes. With mashed potatoes here, they make them here. They're really good. It's not a box. And a salad, maybe a glass of wine. And afterwards, they said, "Well, what do you think? What's your desserts?" Well, I said, "We have good desserts." What's a belly popper? A belly popper it's a giant sundae. It pops your belly. They laughed. Most people didn't order it. Sometimes people did. It's really good. It's not for the faint of heart. It's for more than one person. What's the best dessert? Oh, the best dessert is bourbon pecan pie. Heated it up with a dollop of vanilla ice cream. That's the best. That's what you want to have if this is going to be your last dessert on this earth. That's what you want to have. I could sell that all night long. If I had $1 for every time somebody ordered that, I would have made a lot more money. My goal is the goal was everybody that worked there then was to make at least a bill, as in $100 bill that night. And sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. Oftentimes it depended on what day of the week it was. Mondays and Tuesdays were slower. Towards the weekend were better. Sunday night was family night, perhaps. We closed a little bit early on Sunday night. We stayed open late. My goal was always to turn the tables as many times as I could. A great night would be if I could turn my table, each table, 5 times. That's pretty good. 45 minutes to an hour for each person who sat there. I didn't do that all the time. Mainly it was more like 3 or 4 times, but sometimes 5. Sometimes the people who made the most money at the restaurant are the people who sell the beer and wine and the lounge, the cocktail waitresses, the attractive young ladies who did that. That's where they made most of the money. Thursday nights, it was always so crowded, always so crowded. People were out the door. I didn't do this very often, but a couple of times, friends of mine were coming. I would tell them what time to be there, and they'd come to the side door. And I would go around the side door and open it, and they'd walk in through the offices and come into the restaurant. It's like they'd been there. They wouldn't have to wait in line. One night, and I think I've told this story before, my parole officer, who I got along well with, one Saturday night, she calls the Oyster Bar looking for me. Brad Hurley takes the phone call. He becomes somewhat hysterical and comes up to me. I'm waiting on the table and says, "Jim, you've got to take this phone call. It's your parole officer. I don't know what she wants, but you better go to speak to her right now." So I go over to speak to her and asked her how she's doing. She says, "Fine." She said, "Jim, yes, listen, 3 of my friends and I are outside the Oyster Bar right now. We are wanting to have dinner. They say there's a 2-hour wait. We can't wait 2 hours. What can you do? Can you help us?" I thought a second. I said, "Yes, here's what you do. Come in and come to the front. I'll meet you there in just a few minutes. But do not register. Act like you've already signed up. Otherwise, people will get angry." So I went back and found Brad and told him what was going on. I says, "Can we help this person?" He said, "Absolutely, we can help her. Just go get her and bring her in. I'll make sure she gets the table." Good gracious, Jim. So I did. And that was the end of that. You know, there were funny stories. There were serious stories. There was a person who overreacted to some medication he was on, and he fell out and collapsed on the floor. The ambulance had to come and take him away, and all it was is he was mixing some medications up. And that's what caused him to collapse, nothing more. But there were so many times when people were nice, so gracious, generous in their tips, asking me how I was doing, wishing me luck, giving me a tip larger than they needed to do just to show their support, I guess, that way. A couple of times people gave us $100 bills and stuck them in my pocket or my hand. I remember one lady at lunch, a young lady, her bill was $13 and something for a salad or something like that. And she left $100 tip. She was a young lawyer in Raleigh. What I learned is that people are pulling for you if you screw up and make a mistake, if you say so, if you show some degree of humility, if you try to do your best, even though you're not very good at it, that's almost endearing to them. You know, it's very strange. You would never want me to be your waiter, I suppose, if you were doing fine dining. Fine dining and me are not on the same page. But if you want somebody who could be social, then maybe you might look at me as a possibility. I learned humility. I learned that's one of the greatest aphrodisiacs in the world. Being vulnerable, showing that you're vulnerable is one of the greatest aphrodisiacs in the world because people are attracted to that. They want to help. They want to give you a second, maybe even a third chance, provided that you have a good attitude, you're upbeat, you're happy, you don't whine, you don't complain, you do the best you can, and you smile while you're doing it. I always tried to smile at the oyster bar. I always tried to look as though I was having a good time, which was not an act. Actually, had a good time for a few hours every day. I was young again, or trying to be young again. I was working with young people. It's one of the best things in the world an older person can do is work with someone who is young and doesn't care whatever it is that you were in your past life. They just care that you're doing the very best that you can now. That's what they want. That's what they want. There was Lorraine. Lorraine was 27 years old at that time. She was taller than me. We bonded almost instantly. She had no idea who I was. She says, what have you done? I said, well, this is my first day. And she's there. I said, well, I worked in an office. And she thought that meant I worked in the front office of the oyster bar. She had no idea. She later understood that I was once a lawyer. We would compete against each other every hour on the night, seeing how many tips, how much money have you made so far? Is who could collect the most money? Who would make the biggest tips? We teased each other. I would oftentimes get a couple of ice cubes out of the bin, and right as she's getting ready to walk out of the room to the dining room to wait on her table or take some drinks, I would put the ice down the back of her shirt, making her scream and almost drop whatever she was carrying. She retaliated by oftentimes getting my checks that I had printed out. She'd swipe it off of my pad and with fresh lipstick on her lips, kiss it, kiss it. Meaning I had to take that to the table and explain that away. I remember one Saturday night, I was at this big round table. They rarely put me at the round tables because they were big, but I was at a round table for 5, 6 people. And we were having some, I call it goo, but they were having some kind of pasta dish with a lot of white stuff in it. And I have short arms, but I was trying to balance these plates as best I could, on my arm. And the way to do it is hold your hand out flat, and put the plates on there. And I was trying to get 3 on one arm, which is a lot. I can do 2 pretty easily. And by the way, a trick is it's easier to balance larger plates than smaller plates because you have more plates to work with, size of the plates. Anyway, as I got to the table, they began to slide, and they did slide, and they did not fall to the floor and break. Rather, they sort of went to the table, and one or two of them sort of got turned over and put this stuff all over the tablecloth. And this was a wonderful table. They jumped up, and the guys there said, "Don't worry about it. You don't need to redo this table. Just scrape that away. We'll get you some more food. I'll do it quickly, and we will get a couple of towels. We'll wipe this up and fold the tablecloth underneath, and you're good to go." And do you know the two or three tables around all clapped? It's great. There are so many stories like that, and I'm sure every waiter who's ever worked there has those stories. I think a wonderful book would be a book called Tips, telling stories from waiting tables. There are so many people who can relate to it. In all the things that I do, I have to tell you, I ask people all the time, what's the most, if they waited tables, how did they like it? How did they do? Most people I ask that, uh, it was stressful. You think stress in your job where you work now or have in the past is stressful? Let me tell you what stress is. Stress is when you have 10 or 12 people waiting on you to bring food and you're behind. You're in what they call the weeds and you're trying to get it to the table and you're getting their drinks and all this stuff. The trick is when they first hit the table, before their butts get in the seat, as Dad used to say, taking some water, some ice water, and some hush puppies. If you do that, you buy some time because they have something to put in their mouth and something to drink while you get whatever else it is they want to drink or eat. Do that. I always learn to do that. I don't ask them if they want ice water. I just take it. And I take straws. I don't ask them if they want a straw. I just take them one. It saves trips. If they don't want it, they don't have to use it. There's so many lessons to learn. One of my favorite stories, one Saturday night, there were two fine men who were well known in the real estate market in Raleigh, were there with their wives, sitting at the oyster bar and sitting on those stools, having probably oysters or shrimp or something and drinking wine. My side work for the night was to sweep the floor, which is not hard. You use a dustbin and broom, it doesn't take long. But if I did that, I had to walk right in front of them, and I knew them both. And I didn't want that, so I sort of delayed doing it. And finally, I said, I can't stand this so long. I want to get off and go have a glass of wine. So I just walked up and I said, "Hey, Speck Underwood, and hey, Sam Simpson." Sam's son is the famous golfer now in the United States, North Carolina, won the U.S. Open. And they said, "Jim, how you doing?" "Good, good, good." So we sat there and talked. They could not have been nicer. They could not have been more gracious. They said, "I hope you're making lots of money tonight." "Well, I'm doing pretty well. Thank you so much for asking." I told Sam later, months later, my hesitancy in going up there. He looked at me like I was dumb as dirt before even worrying or thinking about such a thing. All of these things are a byproduct of my waiting tables and lessons in life that I learned. I don't know where I could else have learned them quite as well as I learned them in waiting tables. It is without a doubt, in my opinion, one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I stopped because I think it was time for me to stop. I was getting older. More importantly, I was getting slower. And if I knew I was getting slower, I knew I had to stop. But I remember people like Lorraine. I remember Christine, my manager, and then one of the great bartenders of the world. She loves criminal novels, was fascinated with the McDonald case, thought I should write a criminal novel, which is a good idea. I just still have not done it, but it is a good idea. There was Leanne, who was a manager. She'd become a manager. She's been dating this guy it didn't work out. It nags head. One night she took my hand and raised it to the sky and said, let's have a 10-second prayer for my chances with this guy. It didn't work out. She married someone that she met at the Oyster Bar. They moved away, and she has a wonderful family and very happy. Rhonda, dear Rhonda, what a voice. Could sing beautifully. So talented. Wanted to be an actress. So talented. One night, the couple was going to see the play Carousel in downtown Raleigh. I asked Rhonda if she could come over and sing a medley of music from that play, which she did. You can't make this up. A waitress coming over and singing a medley of music that you're going to see on a play. It's just wonderful. You can't make it up. So there was Mr. Sam. Mr. Sam has passed away. He was born and raised in Africa. Came to this country by way of New York City. He comes south. He would oftentimes work from about 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock, selling shrimp, oysters on a cart. He would walk around the lounge. He married Miss Maggie, who is one of God's most wonderful people. She was in charge of making the soups. She would call me over when I walked in, ask me if I'd had any dinner or anything to eat that day. I said, no. She said, Jim, you got to have something to eat before you start. Sit down, let me get you a cup of soup. And she would do that so many days. She did that for me. It was wonderful. Pharrell. Pharrell was 23, and like Lorraine is 27. She will always be that age to me. And we worked together. We split so many foods together during the course of a shift. She would buy it one night, I'd buy it the other night. We'd split oysters or shrimp or something like that. She was just wonderful. She was just great. There were other people there whose names I don't recall right off the top of my head, but they were so good. And they are so good friends to me. There's Holly Bang. Holly looked a little bit like Carol Burnett, or she had that Carol Burnett mantra. She'd do about ears like that. But Holly, who could be so bouncy, was so smart. She knew Mandarin Chinese. Who knows Mandarin Chinese? Holly Bang did. She married one of the sous chefs, Cliff, has raised a family. There was Kimberly Wynn. Kimberly was a cocktail waitress before I worked there. I knew her as a customer. She would later take a job part-time with my law firm, helping out and working. Kimberly Wynn. And worked for a time with me doing my continuing education seminars. Lives in Cary now, has raised a family. So many good people like that. I'm sure I've left some out and I don't mean to. There was Eleanor. the hostess who would always try to give me good tables. When I mean good tables, she would give me as many people as a booth as she could. She would come up and see me late in the afternoon if it was lunchtime. She said, "Do you want any more tables?" I said, "I just think I'd pass you. Well, it's good. I'm not going to give you more tables today because you're coming back at 5 o'clock. So you can get out of here at 1:30, quarter of two, not be stuck to 3 o'clock." She would do that for me so many times. Whatever I said, she agreed with. She was on my side on every single thing. That's Eleanor. I worked with Eleanor for a while as a host, and she's one of the very best. But I have to say that Brad Hurley was one of the very best people there, and his wife, Jo. Good gracious. He gave me a job. He kept me on as a job. I got angry one time and quit. He said to me, "I see you quit, Jim." I said, "Yeah." "Did you get mad about something?" "Yeah." "What was it?" I told him. He said, "Why don't you take a day or two off and come on back?" I said, "Okay." And that happened. It's been a family affair of mine at the Oyster Bar. Jeff worked there for a short time as a busser when he was very young. Stacy worked as a hostess, and she worked as a waitress. She worked with Rhonda a lot, closed on Sunday nights and other nights a lot, and has worked for some time, a long time hostess at the Oyster Bar. So her first memories of the Oyster Bar is drinking Cokes out of a bottle, playing with magnetized silverware, maybe having some peanuts, swirling around on the chairs at the high top tables. So when I tell you it's a bittersweet time, it is. But you see a lot of life at the Oyster Bar. A lot of people who are now no longer here. One of my favorite people who always come, and he always drank iced coffee. He'd walk into the Oyster Bar. I'd see him slowly walking up to the dining room. I'd get him a glass of iced coffee and just take it to him as he walked past. And he always looked at me and smiled. "What took you so long, Jim?" One night, a couple was there, Bonnie and Leon Woodruff. Leon was a long-time OBGYN doctor in Raleigh. They had a son who died in a tragic fire at Fraternity House at Chapel Hill at graduation some years ago. And 5 or 6 weeks after his passing, came to the Oyster Bar one night for dinner. I asked him how they were doing. She said, "Well, not too well. It's still very new, but I'm getting by as best I can." They were with another couple. She wanted some fried oysters and grouper. It's not on the menu like that. Brad made sure we sent her the fried oysters complimentary. A table nearby bought the bottle of wine that they had ordered. I gave them complimentary dessert. You know, in the South, that's what we do when something happens. We send food. So that's what people were doing that night at the Oyster Bar. After they left, there's another couple there, a young couple that I'd waited on before when she was very pregnant, with their little baby in a stroller. And I went over and spoke to them. They went by a lady at the booth named Dr. Annie Wilkerson, who was still then alive, who was one of the longest and most beloved OBGYN doctors in this town. She was supposed to have delivered my son Jeff. She was present when Stacy was delivered. She's probably delivered half of Raleigh. Her brothers were also doctors. She was one of my great friends. So there you have it in one night, a cycle of life, a tragic death, a newborn child, and a doctor who has seen it all at both ends of the spectrum. You sometimes don't know what you have until you don't have it any longer. These last few weeks since the Oyster Bar announced they were closing their doors at the end of this month, March the 30th, the place has been packed. Lines out the door. People are having a hard time accepting or believing that it's true, but it is. They want to come one more time, one last time, to savor the inside of the restaurant, what it was like, to have whatever their favorite dish is, have it one more time, to suck up the atmosphere one last time. And so I would say to the Oyster Bar, thanks for the memories. Finally, I want to close by saying that I came back as a regular with a group of people, Dan and Denise, Dan Oakley, Denise Sessoms, Bruce and Debbie, Doug and Frankie, Kathy, Gloria, Linda, AJ, all these people. We used to say that we would meet on any day there ends at a Y. Then as we got older, it went to maybe one night, then to Friday night. And then we began to dwindle away. But for those times that we were there and these people that we saw, we will always remember. It was a great place. Thanks for the memories. I hope you've enjoyed this look back at this time. And I hope to see you again next week on another podcast. And I don't know for sure, but I'm hoping that we will have some of the folks who I worked with, perhaps Lorraine, who's in Raleigh, Christine, who is now living in Colorado, and maybe others to talk about and reminisce and tell some of their stories of the 42nd Street Oyster Bar. Thanks and take care and have a great week.